everyone. Welcome to the Wealth Approach podcast. I'm JR Gondeck, joined by Megan Kowalski and Michael Schneider. It's the family time of the year. Everybody's getting together for the holidays. Thanksgiving's next week. So I thought it was a great topic to get into family conversations and some tips and thoughts around, some of the opportunity looking at what's coming in the years ahead from an inheritance standpoint, as it's called the Great Wealth Transfer. And you could see how much wealth is passing over the next 20 plus years. The Gen Z 30 trillion and the millennial generation 27 trillion. So ultimately, if you add those two together to the millennial generation alone, it's 57 trillion. So for this conversation, we were kind of looking at the millennial generation as kind of the discussion point, whether it's where we currently are as millennials to up a generation, if our parents are still living or grandparents, how thoughts go either between our kids, our parents, our grandparents, and kind of some thoughts around what type of family you are. So, Megan, I don't know if you want to go through some of the types of families we want to talk about today.
Yeah, so we categorized a little bit with three main categories of families. And this would be with how open they want their communication to be. So if we look at the sharers category, that's where they're willing to share not only everything that's in place from a structure perspective, but even down to the numbers and maybe even the investments. So and we'll get into pros and cons of each of these as well. But the next category is the as needed sharers. And this is either where they're sharing maybe different entities or structures or trusts that are in place without necessarily sharing the figures just yet, or they're sharing on an as needed basis situationally. So, for instance, if you have kids you're saving for college and they have an intention to help you with that, that would be where they're only sharing that information, but not everything else yet. So we look at that category as well. And then there's the non-share category, and that's the situation that you see in the movies where they show up in the attorney's office, they read the will, and that's when and where you find out about anything at all. So that's where you're completely in the dark about literally everything, which is pretty rare in this day and age, but it still does exist, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of that as well. So first, we kind of wanted to just help you identify which category are you, maybe as the sharer or the generation above that would be helping communicate this information to the next generations. So what are you comfortable with now? And then also identifying with who you're communicating with, what would be the best strategy or category within those to work with. And we'll kind of get into that, but it's not necessarily a one size fits all because as we know, all kids are different. Everyone can be a little different. So you might want to approach them a little bit differently from that perspective as well for when they're ready to receive certain information.
Right. And when you look at that, Megan, you talk about the shares. If you are, your parent or grandparent, and you are looking to just, pull the curtain back on on your estate, on what's set up for kids and grandkids, but you have some members of your family that maybe either aren't old enough, or aren't mature enough, that or just may have some other reasons that they don't want to know about what money is there or is going to be there for them down the road, that you would maybe want to shift that to more of a non-share type relationship. And something like that is okay. We have a lot of parents and grandparents that come to us and say, we've got this significant amount of wealth, and it's going to our kids and grandkids. We want to make sure that there's the fire in the belly. So how do we really do that? Because they want to open up, but they don't really know how they should be doing that and at what appropriate time, or what the appropriate time is to talk
Mhm.
about that with the different generations as well. Because as you see here, like within the pros and cons, the pros of being a share is that, you're an open book. There's the clarity, there's the transparency. You can have a very, the dialogue should flow fairly smoothly. But the cons as well is if you tell kids too much, that they say, hey, listen, I know I got this coming when mom and dad are gone. Maybe I don't need to work as hard. Maybe I'm not going to push myself as hard. And that might go against some of the family values that you're trying to make sure get passed on.
And
Yeah,
when
and
Mhm.
Michael, to your point a little bit with the share category, I think another thing is if you want to be a sharer, it's also another question you should ask is when, because especially with the fire in the belly um, concept, maybe being a full open share too soon could dull some of that potential motivation and growth. So that's another thing to just take into consideration for that specific category of family.
Well, and when you look, Megan, to this time of the year, gifting is a big topic of conversation for families. Markets and economy have done fairly well this year, so a lot of people have more wealth than maybe they expected. So gifting is on the minds of a lot of people and families. So as you talk about preparing the next generation, or Megan, to your question, when is the right time, or how do you know, right? All of our kids are different. I look at my son Rory. If he's spending dad's money, there's an unlimited budget. If it's coming from his money, right, he's saving, he wants to invest, right, and getting a sense of where your kids are. So I think, with gifting this time of the year, you could test out your kids a little bit. So we always encourage, as you think about gifting, do they need it? I mean, on the top of this slide, you can see 47% of millennials still consider themselves somewhat financially dependent on their parents. Do you really want your children to be financially dependent on you? Probably not necessarily. On the other hand, gifting can be that balance between setting them up for the long run, teaching them, how to invest or how to save. And Michael, we had this conversation about personal investing, right? And your personal financial, whether it's a mortgage, your financial plan, how much do I need to save? And gifting can be that tool to kind of set families up. And to Megan, to your point, and my son Rory example, how much do you kind of put into a trust that is there for the long run versus maybe you want them to enjoy some of the money too. You want to see the fruits of your labor and them enjoying it as well. And it's really no one size fits all, right? It's a personal decision and really getting a sense as to where your children are and how to teach them along the way.
Right. And, to kind of go with that, Jared, we've got a great story with one of our client families that, I'd probably put them in the as needed share category. And one of the sons just wanted to start his own business, but he was, the parents were doing the annual gifting, but it wasn't quite enough to really allow him to step away from his corporate job and start that business. But through discussions and conversations and having sort of these open lines, the parents didn't say, hey, we've got X amount in the bank, but they said, we can do, an interfamily loan at a more preferred interest rate to allow the son to say, hey, I'm in a position now where I can step away from this corporate role that I don't like and start my own business. And, so far it's been a great success. And those are the types of things where where you really see the as needed sharing being, very successful. And we see that with a lot of the families we work with that, as things come up that you can, give the details, where it is applicable. Again, not, you can withhold values, you can withhold account numbers, things like that, but you're still allowing your sort of the next generation to kind of make the most out of their opportunity and, see the kids happy is always a bonus for parents and grandparents too.
Well, and Michael, one of the big examples I see, having just been blessed with a new daughter myself, who's a month old today, one of your first thoughts besides a baby and your mother being healthy is saving for college, right? A lot of parents or grandparents want to, set some money aside, and that as needed sharing, a lot of times what we run into is the parents that have the children are setting up college save plans or their own, college retirement savings for their children. Well, then the parents and grandparents are setting up similar vehicles, and there's a lot of duplication and overlap. And you could see the need if you're not quite ready to share everything. If you're setting something up for the future for your kids or grandkids, it's important to communicate, especially, it's a simple example that we see a lot of duplication or not optimizing, setting aside for college.
Definitely. And I would say kind of the theme we can go into a little bit of best practices for each of these categories, but in general, one of the main themes we see the most success with is just open lines of communication and helping kind of coach along the way. Another thing would be using outside resources as well. So bringing in an advisor to help coach on both sides of the dynamic with helping mentor them, getting their arms around just everything they need to learn to be able to manage this wealth in the future. So that can be another way to identify, to first of all, have them get trained for it, but identify when they would be ready to receive certain information as well, and when would be good timing for them to be prepared for that conversation.
When you look at this challenge, Megan, I think most families start in the don't share category, right? I mean, your kids are young. You don't want them to know anything. You don't want to
As
share
they
anything.
should. Rory probably isn't ready yet.
And it just evolves over time, right? And
Right.
you want to know when they're ready, how to, get them prepared. And, one example I remember from a long time ago is we had a family meeting with the client family years ago. And this client started very much in the do not share category. My children will find out when I'm no longer here. Two, we got to the point of let's have a meeting. We'll just talk big picture about the IRAs, the trust, the real estate. And we had a very nice 2-hour family meeting, went through, it was a great discussion. And by the end of the meeting, he stands up and says, and by the way, there's 20 million in the pot. So you went from one extreme of no sharing all the way to a total share. And right, everybody's at a different stage in their family. And again, there's no right or wrong, but it's important to just see and understand where your kids are before you overshare, which again, can be a risk as well.
Right. And from the non-sharing perspective, you look at a couple stories, whether it's the beneficiary who walks into the office, after parents pass away and say, yeah, I'm happy that I got this money, but where was it, when I needed it, 10, 15, 20 years ago? I have my
Mhm.
own wealth now, and, this would have been nice and would have made life easier. Or you have a situation where you have somebody who has a lot of unexpected wealth pass away. And, again, this is kind of as Megan was saying in the beginning, you kind of walk in and to the attorney's office, hear the will, and you say, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know that my parents had this." And it's kind of like having the winning lottery ticket, and you see just how people are just ill-equipped to deal with lottery type winnings, and this would be just a very similar situation. So to at least have the conversations about, hey, what's in place. Again, don't necessarily need to know the values, but make sure that the beneficiaries and heirs are ready to inherit is going to be an important part for transferring wealth moving forward.
Well, and Michael, I talk about this a lot, that the millennial generation gets a bad rap for being the poorest generation relative to prior generations, from wealth accumulation, everything else, all relative. And again, one of the main reasons, in my opinion, is that people are living longer. So the prior generations inherited wealth sooner than the millennial generation, right? And as you talk about, why it's important to have a financial plan, no matter where your net worth is, it's really how much do you need to sustain your lifestyle and what is potentially available if you want to help your kids or grandkids of the generation below and balance those out because it is sort of a nice compromise within families to really help out, get them set up for inheriting future wealth and be prepared and build up their own wealth. So I think it's interesting discussion this time of year. And with that, we want to thank you for tuning in. Wish everyone a happy, healthy Thanksgiving and holiday season ahead. And we'll touch base next month.
Thanks.
Thank you.